A live grenade rolled directly under his body. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He pressed himself down harder onto it and kept firing. What happened in the next 8 seconds will make you question everything you think you know about the limits of a human being. This is a real story, and it's one of the most insane things any soldier has ever survived. His name was Sergeant First Class Leroy Petrie. And before we get into what he did, because what he did will genuinely stop you mid-breath, you need to understand who he was before that moment, because heroes don't appear out of nowhere. They're built, quietly, over years, through choices nobody claps for. Petrie grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He wasn't the kid who talked about joining the military at every family dinner. He wasn't the type who had his life mapped out on a whiteboard by age 16. He was regular, he was real. He worked hard, kept his head down, cared about the people around him, and somewhere along the way decided that service was the thing that made sense to him. He enlisted in the Army in 1999. By 2008, he'd done more deployments than most soldiers see in an entire career. He was a Ranger, 75th Ranger Regiment, which, if you don't know what that means, let me tell you, these are not regular infantry. Rangers operate at a level of physical and mental intensity that filters out the overwhelming majority of people who try. The selection process alone breaks men who are genuinely tough by any civilian standard. Petrie didn't just make it through. He became a leader inside it. 8 deployments. 8 times he packed his kit, kissed his family, walked through that door not knowing for certain he'd come back through it. 8 times the mission came first because that's what he signed up for, and that's the kind of man he was. By May 2008, he was in Afghanistan. And Afghanistan, in 2008, in the specific area where Petrie's unit was operating, was not a place where anything stayed calm for long. May 26, 2008, Paktia Province, Afghanistan. Petrie's Ranger unit had been tasked with capturing a high-value target, a senior insurgent commander operating in the region, the kind of target that has ripple effects when he's off the board. Intel was solid. The plan was solid. These were Rangers. Solid was their baseline. They moved in fast. That's how Rangers operate. Speed, aggression, overwhelming force applied precisely. You don't give the enemy time to react, time to regroup, time to think. You move and you keep moving. The compound looked like 100 other compounds in that province. Mud walls, narrow corridors, the particular kind of stillness that can mean nothing or can mean everything. It meant everything. As Petrie's team moved through the compound, the situation fractured fast. Insurgents were present, more than the intelligence had suggested, positioned better than the plan had accounted for. In under 60 seconds, what had started as a capture operation became a firefight in an enclosed space with bad angles and worse geometry. 2 of Petrie's fellow Rangers, Private First Class Lucas Robinson and Private First Class Daniel Higgins, moved into a courtyard position to establish cover fire. They were young. Robinson was 22. Higgins was 23. They were good soldiers, trained, ready, doing exactly what they were supposed to do. But in the chaos of that courtyard, they didn't see it. An enemy fighter had pulled the pin on a grenade, and it landed directly between them. Here's what most people don't understand about a live grenade in an enclosed space. You have roughly 4 to 5 seconds from the moment it lands. That's it. 4 to 5 seconds between the grenade hitting the ground and the explosion that will send shrapnel in every direction with enough force to kill or permanently disable every person within range. 4 to 5 seconds doesn't sound like much. It isn't. In that time, the average person's brain is still catching up to what their eyes just saw. The signal hasn't even fully traveled from the eyes to the conscious mind before the decision window is already closing. Petrie was approximately 10 feet away when the grenade landed. He saw it instantly, and here's what he did, in a sequence that took less time than it takes you to read this sentence. He moved toward it, not away, toward. He crossed that 10 feet, bent down, grabbed the grenade with his right hand, a live, primed grenade that was seconds away from detonating, and threw it away from his men. He got it away from Robinson and Higgins. He saved their lives completely, but the grenade detonated in his hand. I want you to sit with that for a second, not to be dramatic, but because the reality of what Petrie experienced in that moment is something that the human brain genuinely struggles to process. A hand grenade, when it detonates, releases a pressure wave and sends metal fragments outward at approximately 1,000 feet per second. At point-blank range, and his hand was essentially point-blank, the damage is catastrophic. Petrie lost his right hand, gone, instantly, in the explosion. He was also hit by shrapnel in both legs. And here's the part that tells you everything you need to know about who this man is. He didn't go down immediately, with his hand gone, with shrapnel wounds in both legs, with the noise of an ongoing firefight surrounding him. Sergeant First Class Leroy Petrie stayed conscious, stayed present, and stayed focused on the situation around him. He called out to his men. His first words, by the accounts of those who were there, were not about himself. He checked on Robinson and Higgins. He confirmed they were okay. Then he allowed himself to deal with what had just happened to him. Private First Class. Lucas Robinson has spoken about that day in interviews since then. He's used a lot of words to try to describe what it was like to watch Petrie cross that courtyard and grab that grenade. He's a grown man, a veteran, someone who has been through more than most people will ever face. And every time he talks about it, you can see him working to find language adequate to the moment. He's never fully found it, because there isn't language for watching someone make that choice, watching someone's body move toward danger to pull it away from you, watching someone absorb the consequence of a decision that you didn't even have time to make yourself. Robinson has said, and this is the kind of thing that stays with you, that he thinks about Petrie's decision every day. Not with guilt, though that's there too, and that's its own complicated thing, but with a specific kind of awareness, an awareness that he is alive because another man decided his life was worth more than his own hand. That's not a metaphor. That's not motivational framing. That is the literal, physical, documented truth of what happened in that courtyard. Higgins, similarly, went on to serve, to build a career, to have a life that exists in the specific shape it exists in because of 8 seconds and one decision. Both of them have talked about the weight of that. The gratitude that has no adequate expression, the way it reconfigures your understanding of what people are capable of when they care about something more than themselves. Petrie was medevaxed out of the compound. The medical team worked fast. Ranger units have combat medics that are among the best trained trauma responders in any military in the world. They have to be, because the environments they work in don't leave room for anything less. He stabilized. He survived. But survival, when you've just lost a hand and taken shrapnel to both legs in an active combat zone, is just the beginning of a very long road. The medical evacuation took him through a series of facilities before he ended up at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., which has become, over the years of these conflicts, one of the most remarkable places on Earth in terms of what its teams can do for the people who arrive there, carrying what war does to a body. Petrie went through surgeries, multiple. The kind of reconstructive process that takes months, not weeks, months, and requires a particular combination of physical resilience and mental endurance that doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the same place that made him cross that courtyard. He got fitted for a prosthetic hand. He learned to use it. He went back to his family. And then, and this is the part that might actually be the most remarkable part of all of this, he went back to the army. There's a conversation that happens, or a version of it, with every soldier who sustains a serious combat injury. It's not one conversation. It's 100 small ones, with doctors, with commanders, with family, with yourself, in the quiet hours when nobody else is in the room and you're lying there looking at the ceiling, trying to figure out who you are now and what comes next. For some soldiers, the injury is the end of that chapter, and that's not failure. That's reality. The body has limits. The psyche has limits. Making peace with those limits and building something meaningful on the other side of them is its own form of courage. But for Petrie, the conversation went a different direction. He wanted to stay in, not out of stubbornness, not out of denial about what had happened to him. He was clear-eyed about it. He had one hand now, a prosthetic where the other used to be, and he understood exactly what that meant and what it didn't mean. What it didn't mean, that he was done. He continued to serve as an active duty ranger. He became a living demonstration of something that the Army, and frankly the world, needed to see, that the injury didn't define the soldier, that the man who grabbed that grenade was still present, still capable, still committed. He became a mentor, a leader in a different form than before, but no less real. He spoke to younger soldiers, not to lecture them. He wasn't built for lecturing, but to be present, to be visible, to be the answer to a question that every young soldier who faces something terrible needs answered. Is there life on the other side of this? Yes. Here's what it looks like. Here I am. On September 12, 2011, Sergeant First Class Leroy Petrie stood in the East Room of the White House. He was in dress uniform, back straight, the particular bearing of a ranger, not performed, just real. The way that some things become so deeply part of a person's physical identity that they stop being posture and start being simply the way a person occupies space. President Barack Obama placed the Medal of Honor around his neck. The Medal of Honor is not a thing the military hands out generously. It is the highest military decoration in the United States. The bar for it is genuinely extraordinary. You have to have done something that goes so far beyond the call of duty in the face of such clear and present danger that even by military standards it stands apart. Petrie became the second living recipient of the Medal of Honor from the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan at the time of his award. The citation that accompanied the medal described, in the formal language that military citations use, exactly what happened in that courtyard. The distance, the grenade, the decision, the throw, the detonation. But formal language can only carry so much. The real weight of what happened lives in the faces of the people who were in that room with Obama, the Rangers who served alongside Petrie, his family, his wife, his children, watching the man they love receive an acknowledgement of something they'd already known about him, something they carry in a different way than ribbons and citations can describe. His kids were there. Think about that. His kids watched their father receive the Medal of Honor for grabbing a live grenade to save two men who were strangers to them but brothers to him. What do you do with that as a child? How do you grow up carrying that story about your father? The answer, presumably, is carefully and gratefully, and with a very specific understanding of what it means to be human at your best. I've been telling you about Leroy Petrie, but I want to step back for a second, because there's a layer to this story that I think matters beyond the incredible facts of what happened. We talk about heroism like it's a special category, like it belongs to a specific type of person, someone fundamentally different from the rest of us. Someone built differently in some way we can identify and separate out, like a different species. Petrie doesn't support that theory. He was a man from Santa Fe who enlisted in the Army because it made sense to him. He trained hard because that's what Rangers do. He deployed because that's what the mission required. He showed up day after day, year after year, without ceremony or fanfare, doing the thing he'd committed to doing. And then one day, in a courtyard in Afghanistan, with less time to think than it takes to blink, everything he was, all of those years, all of that training, all of those choices, came together in one motion. He moved toward the grenade. Not because he calculated the odds, not because he worked through a decision tree in his head. He moved because the people next to him mattered more to him in that moment than his own safety. And that truth had been built into him, layer by layer, through every choice he'd made before that moment ever arrived. That's not superhero stuff. That's character. Character built over time, quietly, without anyone watching. And that's the thing about soldiers, about the ones who do these things, that the stories can sometimes miss in the rush to tell the dramatic part. The dramatic part is real, absolutely real. But the 10 feet of courtyard that Petrie crossed, he crossed it 1,000 times before, in training, in discipline, in small daily choices to be the kind of man who runs toward rather than away. The grenade was just the day all of that got tested at once. Petrie stayed in the Army until 2014, when he retired at the rank of Sergeant First Class. 15 years of service, 8 deployments, 1 Medal of Honor, 1 prosthetic right hand. He didn't disappear after retirement. He stayed connected to veteran communities, to advocacy work, to the ongoing conversation about what happens to soldiers when they come home. He spoke at events. He engaged with the public not as a celebrity, but as a person who understood that the story had value. Not for him, but for the people who needed to hear it. His family had built something real through all of it. His wife had been part of every deployment in her own way, holding things together at home, raising their children, managing the particular kind of anxiety that military families carry and rarely talk about publicly. That's its own service. That's its own form of commitment. The kids grew up with a father who wore a prosthetic hand and a Medal of Honor and treated neither as the most important thing about himself. The most important things, by all accounts, were simpler: showing up, being present, teaching his children what he'd learned about what actually matters when everything else is stripped away. Here's something that doesn't make it into the official record. Every life that Petri touched after that day in 2008, every soldier he mentored, every young person who heard his story and felt something shift inside them, every child who grew up understanding the world slightly differently because of what their parent did, is a ripple from that one moment. Robinson and Higgins, their lives, their families, their contributions to the world, ripples. The soldiers who heard Petri's story in training and felt it recalibrate their understanding of what commitment means. Ripples. The kid, sitting somewhere right now, watching a video about a soldier who grabbed a grenade and survived, who feels something stir in them about what they're capable of. Ripple. That's how valor actually works. It doesn't stay contained in the moment. It doesn't stay inside the courtyard. It moves outward through time in ways that nobody can fully track or measure, touching things and people that the original act had no way of anticipating. Petri threw that grenade away from his men, but the force of what he did has been moving outward ever since. There's a version of a story like this that ends with, "And that's why soldiers are the greatest people on earth." That's not the version I want to leave you with, because that framing, as well-intentioned as it is, actually does something wrong. It moves soldiers into a different category, a separate, elevated category, and in doing so, it removes the lesson. The lesson is not, soldiers are capable of this, and the rest of us aren't. The lesson is, this is what human beings can do when they've built themselves correctly and they're standing next to people they love. You might never face a grenade, but you will face your version of the courtyard. You will face the moment where the easy choice and the right choice split apart and go in different directions, where running away is possible and staying means cost. What you do in that moment will be built, or not built, from everything that came before it. Petri moved toward the grenade because he had been moving toward hard things his entire life. What are you moving toward? Welcome back to Code of Valor. Every story on this channel is about that question. Real soldiers, real decisions, real moments where everything is on the line. Subscribe, because these stories deserve to be told, and you deserve to hear them. This is Code of Valor. See you in the next one.